Welcome everybody to OCI Beverage Break. In this series, we will bring you guests to share interesting stories and thoughtful insights and have some fun along the way. We're your hosts. I'm Paul, and this is Charles.
Hey, Paul. It's important that we're here, but more importantly is our guest today, Marcy Buckner. She's here. She's actually the senior, let me get this right, the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs,
yes,
right, at NAHU. She served as a Washington lobbyist since ACA passed in 2009. Marcy received her Juris Doctor from the New England School of Law in Boston, Massachusetts, and her Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and History from the College of Charleston in South Carolina.
yes.
And when she's not in the office or traveling the country speaking at healthcare symposiums like today, Marcy spends her time introducing her rescued Cavalier King Charles Spaniel Harrison to city life. So with that, welcome, Marcy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you. So the most important part, this is OCI Beverage Break, right? Like this, there's a beverage in front of us. We have to talk about it. So you've picked our beverage for today. Can you tell us why you picked it? What you picked?
Sure, I chose Prosecco because it's blonde and bubbly, just like me. And it's also very hot in DC right now. So something like cool and crisp and refreshing was definitely on my mind.
Sounds good to me. I'll drink it. So cheers everybody out there. We all have some. So cheers. There we go.
Now you did mention one other drink.
I did. So my usual signature cocktail is what I like to call a Marcy-tini. I love it. Y'all are already laughing at my jokes. This is going really well. I think someone over here finished their Prosecco. But it's a gin martini, very dirty with blue cheese olives, but I wasn't sure if that would be a crowd pleaser. So we would be able to get through all of our questions that we had. So we went with the Prosecco.
Excellent choice. I think you said it's hot in DC. It's plenty hot here too. So I think we're all going to enjoy it. It'll be good.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about how you got your start. How did you end up in your position in DC?
Sure. So I grew up in a really small town in South Carolina and didn't really know a lot about the lobbying industry growing up. And then when I was at the College of Charleston, I had a federal lobbyist that came and spoke to one of my classes. And she just happened to be someone who worked during Hillary Care. So she had a lot to share with us about her experiences during that time. And I just found it fascinating how someone who worked outside of a government job, so not a staffer for a member of Congress, not a member of Congress, but how much they as a private person could do with advocacy and how much impact they could have with writing the laws or changing the laws. And I just found that fascinating and empowering. And I wanted to kind of grow up and be one of those people that had a hand in shaping the laws that form our country.
Interesting. So what aspect of it do you enjoy the most? Because I mean, I love politics. I love paying attention to it. When you get into the actual verbiage of some of this stuff, it's like, no, I'm out. So
that's where I'm in.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. I love going through, or I don't know if we would use the word love, but I do enjoy going through new pieces of legislation and regulations, finding where they can be improved, or also finding how to interpret them to, kind of as the last speaker said, where you need to let it go to be able to be in compliance, and where we can improve things or explain them a little better to make sure that we're not getting in our own way while we're trying to implement some of these, now a lot of really new laws.
So one of the observations I had when I was in DC, or when I've been in DC, is that this country is actually run by 19 and 20-year-olds. Do you have a sense of that? I mean, when you're dealing with these offices, is that kind of who you're dealing with, in addition to obviously the representatives, but aren't they doing a lot of the work?
Oftentimes the staffers are doing a lot, so you have to be really nice to the schedulers to make sure that you get invited back. There are certain things that you can do that get you on the naughty list and not into offices. And then a lot of the LAs, is what we call them, the legislative aides, are younger, have just graduated, or mostly from undergrad. And so talking to them and explaining to them some of those deeper policy issues is definitely a challenge. And so that's where we kind of have a staggered approach in educating them, and then making sure that we get a baseline with some of the younger staffers and then build up to the more experienced directors and chiefs of staff before we get to the members of Congress. And then, and I have some other folks on my team that usually do that part. And then I come in as the heavy hitter, the nerd, that talks about the specific policy wonky stuff once we get to that higher level.
So you talk about getting invited back. How do you get invited during COVID when there's
That's a good question. Yeah. So during COVID, it has been a lot more difficult, and most of our meetings have been over Zoom. The Capitol has just started opening up to a lot more in-person visits, but then over the past, I guess, month or so, there have been some offices that are requiring vaccination cards to be able to come in and meet in person, or because of security issues, you're required to have a staffer come and meet you at the front door and escort you through the building, which is really different than what we've had prior to all of this. So a lot of it is being able to be really flexible with Zoom meetings and kind of making those connections.
So in your job, what would you say is the most, well, maybe it's two-part, maybe what is the most rewarding part of your job, but then the most frustrating?
The most rewarding, let's start with that one. The most rewarding. The most rewarding is definitely seeing something that I wrote or that we suggested at NAHU find its way into a final piece of law. So having my background as an attorney, going to law school, I have a lot of some of my classmates that I graduated with that are like, you know, oh, you're not really doing law, you're not a real attorney. And I'm kind of like, okay, well, when was the last time you made case law? Oh, because you probably didn't, it's really hard. But I can go through and find states and federal code that have language in it that I wrote and they have to follow. So I think that's very rewarding. And that's my kind of like, ha to them. But I am a real attorney, I'm writing laws you have to follow. So that's very, very rewarding. And also to see with our members when we are able to change things like that and change the wording to make it easier for you all either to be in compliance or make access to care and coverage easier for your clients, that is very rewarding when I get calls that are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this piece changed and it's so great. The most frustrating part is trying to get some of those changes in place. So oftentimes there are specific members of Congress that are just really against something or for something, and you're just not going to change their minds. And other times there are a lot of common sense pieces that you think should just go ahead and be into law, but it's some of those other political barriers that stop it. And so it's kind of like, is Sisyphus the one that's trying to roll the ball up the rock up the mountain? Atlas is holding it on his shoulders, right? It's like Sisyphus, where you get to the top and then it rolls back down. You're just like, okay, let's start all over again. Because remember, congressional sessions are 2 years. So you have 2 years, and then if your bill doesn't pass, you have to start over again.
You said something that my brain's having trouble computing. You said common sense in government. I feel like that's not a thing.
Yeah, they don't always go together, for sure.
Yeah, I would say, you know, on the frustration side, you know, JJ's in the room somewhere, and one of the things we've talked about is just going back every year talking about the same things, right? And I know you mentioned that the other day, you have new staff, but continually bring these up year after year that should be passed.
Right, so one example I was telling Paul and Charles yesterday was the employer reporting bill that we've been working on for a couple of years. How many of you love doing your employer reporting? Zero hands. So our bill that we've been working on basically since like the beginning of all of the employer reporting rules would simplify it, make it something that you do prospectively at the beginning of the year, and then take out a lot of the extra information that you're reporting that doesn't really need to be there. And we had really great champions on the Hill. And then this year, the staffers for our, what we call our committees of jurisdiction, so the committees that would hear and put forward the bill, energy and commerce and finance, health, the health committee, the lead staffers all changed and we've moved to other places. So we have to start all over again with educating them, even though the member of Congress that they've worked for before or that committee in the past has supported it, we still need to get those staffers on board so then we can kind of move up in the chain and get something introduced.
Wow. So what kind of things are you working on right now? Are there things that are top of mind that you're working on currently?
Sure. So right now, employer reporting is one of them, and also we work a lot just on focusing on the benefits of employer-sponsored coverage. And part of that is to balance out some of the conversations in DC about single payer or public option. We're also involved in a lot of the conversations right now with infrastructure and the reconciliation bill, which I know everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about when I mention that. But with reconciliation, there are some pieces that could lower the age of Medicare to age 60. And some people are thinking, well, that could be really great. But then there are other sides that could really backfire. And there are also pointing out to them while they're talking about it where they might have it in a bullet point and they don't have it fully fleshed out in the draft of what they're working on. They don't have a lot of answers to things like, okay, if you lower the age of Medicare to age 60, what happens to those newly eligible? Are you putting them in the same market with those that are over age 65? Or are you separating them out into a separate market? What's gonna happen to premiums? What's gonna happen to employer-sponsored coverage for those folks that are 60 to 65? Are we going to see the same thing happen that we saw with the co-ops where they kind of put the co-op people in a separate risk pool, and then we all know what happened there. So those are the questions that we bring up when we see things like that to make sure that some of these pieces are fully thought through, because oftentimes we find that they haven't been.
So do you feel a lot of the work is actually done with regulators then? Like once something, here it is, and now we're gonna actually figure out what it is, and how it's going to be implemented and all those things.
Absolutely. So Congress, when they pass a statute, it's very much like the what, like this is what we want to do. And then it goes to the agencies, and the agencies write the regulations, and they do the how. And so some of that work that you're mentioning now, and we just had a huge victory on this, so this is something else that excites me. We submitted several letters and had several in-person Zoom conversations with the Department of Labor, HHS, and Treasury about some of the pieces in the Consolidated Appropriations Act. That was that big bill that passed at the end of last year that had information about employer disclosures on certain information about your employer plans, including the prescription drug disclosures that you all may have heard of, requiring employers to disclose the top 50 drugs that were prescribed within their plan, down to how many pills were prescribed out, and the cost for everything. And this is just information employers don't have. That's not data that they own. Usually it's owned by the PBMs, and the PBMs aren't required to disclose that to the employers. So here we had a statute that passed asking them to do something, but then the agencies now are tasked with putting the how together, and we're approaching the agencies and saying, hey, Congress didn't really know what they were doing when they did this. I know that's shocking, you guys. And they didn't understand the way that this information is shared between a PBM and an employer, and the fact that it's not shared. So we need you as regulators to try to work on this. And so last week we saw a delay announced for certain aspects in the CAA, which included those employer disclosures and the pharmaceutical benefits, as well as aspects from the transparency and coverage bill. And it was because the statute that was passed, and then these rules and the transparency rules and upcoming rules for the CAA didn't all jive together. And so it was really rewarding when the FAQs came out from the DOL. Sorry, I'm using a lot of acronyms, so just like flag me down if you think I'm speaking another language. But it was really rewarding to see them come out and number one, acknowledge that these conflicting bills did not mesh together to be able to be implemented, and that there needed to be more time, which is what we asked for, before they go into effect. So those are the types of conversations we have with the agencies to make sure once we do get kind of that final product, because they do like the final kind of shining off of a law to do the how with the regulations. And when we get to that point, that's really where we need to see some impact there. And it's oftentimes easier to get things changed in the rules, like we saw with this delay, than it is to get changes in Congress, because we all know how Congress is. So.
Unfortunately. Yeah, speaking of, can you talk about what your conversations are like around compensation disclosure?
Sure. I know that's a biggie, right? The upcoming broker compensation disclosure. You can get it. And that was also a part of the CAA, since I'm rattling that acronym off. And part of that, and I'll just start with like our conversations with the statute, and that was one of the pieces where there was a member of Congress that just felt really, really strongly that it be in the No Surprises Act, which ended up being in the CAA. And we just were not gonna get a carve out there. So we went in and had conversations and talked to the staffers about how you all are compensated, what information is already in your Form 5500s. The fact that in small group, because I think a lot of you guys are in small group, that there really isn't a variance that much in your compensation, and a lot of it is up to the carrier. So it's not really something that you're negotiating with the client or able to kind of pull some levers on. And the same thing with the individual market, that's basically set by the carrier. So we asked for carve-outs in those markets, we didn't get them. What we did get for the statute was they allowed for, in the disclosure for agents and brokers to be able to do kind of an estimate or share a calculation if you aren't able to disclose at the beginning of a contract, because this is prospective disclosure. It's not like the Form 5500s when you do it after the year. But if you are entering into a contract and you're not sure what your compensation is going to be because it's based on a book of business or it's based on your different type of agency setup that you have in your business, that you can provide a calculation of what it could be and have that count. So that was a win for us on the statutory level. And then now we're talking with the Department of Labor and HHS about providing more guidance and rules, because in the statute, it's very vague. And we brought up a lot of things to them. One of the things that just like blew their mind when we were on the Zoom with them was when I brought up the fact that there are some plans that are sold as a group plan, but that are actually an individual plan. And they were like, what? And so we were asking, like, how do you want us to report that? And you're reporting it as an individual, in the individual market rules, or are you reporting it under the group plan rules? Because they're two different ones. So we provided them with a very long letter with all of these questions, and we are awaiting an answer, but we have heard from HHS that they're working on it. So that is promising.
That's interesting. I feel like I just see you sitting in those meetings with them, bringing up these questions, and their heads like literally exploding. Like, oh my gosh, we didn't think of any of that. Right? Because they don't know our industry. Exactly,
and especially how you guys are paid. I mean, there was an entire meeting that was just about that with them, and they really try not to let anything kind of go on their faces. So when they get really quiet and get like straight face, that they're freaking out.
Oh yeah.
They're like, don't show anything. But then they're like, can you provide us some more information on that in writing? And that's there. We had no idea.
Yeah, I was getting flagged down for a question out there.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the compensation. So what about broker trips, golf outings, things like that are all part of doing business, but not necessarily tied to one client?
That's part of our questions, and that would be like the indirect compensation, right? And I got a nasty email from someone when they read our letter from an agent, because we asked for a better definition of indirect compensation, and I got this email that was like, well, there's a definition in the statute, why are you asking this? And I was like, because it's not clear, because there are things like that. Or what if a carrier sends your office like a box of steaks at the end of the year for the holidays, and that's over $1,000? How do you allot that out? Like, do you try to split that out? We're in Nebraska, I figured you guys got steaks out here.
Or college World Series tickets, or
Right, or a case of Prosecco. Like, how are you supposed to divide that out by the agents that are active in your agency, or how is that reported? Because a lot of this came from Senator Alexander's office. I'll link some names here. He didn't come back, so we can tell tales on him. But it came from his office thinking that you all were just like going on lavish cruises all the time and had all of this extra compensation that clients weren't aware of. And I mean, I know you guys are on cruises all the time because you're sending me questions about all of this stuff all the time. And so that was like one of the biggest things to overcome, but then they didn't even have a solution in the statute of how to report the things that they were most critical of.
You're going to be a popular person to talk to during happy hour. There's a lot of follow-up questions. So.
Well, Paul, I was going to ask, have you ever gotten a box of steaks from an insurance?
No,
I think there's a couple.
It's these guys over there, yeah. You have to talk to them.
I don't think that's right.
So tell us, what do you do when you're not lobbying?
When I'm not lobbying, I do spend a lot of time with my dog. And I was telling Charles, I saw in the notes that Christine referenced him as Harrison, the lobby dog. And he's very much the lobby dog in my building. I live in a big historic building because we can't get through the lobby without people stopping us because he's just adorable. And he's trying to deal with the public attention he's getting there. But and you know, I obviously just have fascinating conversation for people who are not in the health insurance industry, so they just want to talk to him, not really to me.
So I always love hearing, especially from all the experiences that you've had. Are there any stories that stand out that you're just like, you'll never believe or happened, or something along those lines? Is there anything like that?
Well, there are definitely some things that are like, okay, as much as we're just like teasing on members of Congress and common sense and things like that, there are also some like members of Congress, they're just like you and me kind of things. And I was actually seated beside, and he's since retired and passed, but this was years ago. I was seated beside Ike Skelton from Missouri. I know that's all a recognizable name from everyone, but member of Congress. And he served for several years, but he had polio as a child, so he didn't have full mobility on one side of his body. And I was attending an event for another organization that I volunteer for, but I was seated beside him, and they didn't seat his aide with him from his office, so he was having trouble eating. And he asked me if I could help him. Like, I just met this man. And I was like, okay, and like cut up his stuff and like broke his bread apart, got a straw for his wine, imported things. And he knew we were at this event to talk about other issues, but then he asked me for my card afterwards. And about a week later, I got summoned to his office, and he wanted to know, aside from the event that we were at, what he could do for me for who I actually worked for. And so that was just very kind, and you know, like they're just like you and me, they need help with things sometimes, or like telling Marshall Blackburn she had lipstick on her teeth before going on stage at Capitol Conference because no one wanted to tell her. And I was like, she wants to know before she gets on stage in front of 1,000 people, and we put her face on one of these like huge screens, someone has to tell her. So they elected me to tell her, no one wanted to. And then there's other fun things just like about living in DC where one time I saw Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the opera. That was like, oh my God. And we were in the same like room for intermission. And it's the Russian tea room at the Kennedy Center, and I had a friend take a picture of her like behind me because I didn't want to interrupt her. But she was drinking booze, by the way. So fellow bubbly fan.
Nice. I feel really bad, Paul. I didn't tell you had lipstick on. I should have done that before we got up.
Don't use that camera. Yeah, no, that story sounds straight out of like Anarch Mike. I don't know if you were in here for his conversation.
A little bit, yeah.
But yeah, the fact that you were willing to sit and listen made all the difference. So that's cool. You know, a lot of us go to DC every year and get a chance to meet with our representatives. But is that scenario of us sitting in the room talking with them or their staffers, is that pretty much what a typical day looks like? Or do you have cool experiences that I'll never see when I'm out there?
So I do send our other lobbyists out, John and Chris, to do a lot of the daily meetings, and then like I said, I come in as like the heavy hitter with the bigger policy meetings, and then I also do a lot of work with the administration. But I mean, one of the other fun things is like the first time I got to go to the White House for a meeting, and you just are not going to forget that when you're in line and you're not in the tourist line, you're in the other line. It's very fancy. Or going to the Capitol for meetings and you're going into the speaker's office, or you get to see the speaker's balcony, regardless of who is in power at the time. And you end up going into these rooms that are just so unbelievably gorgeous. And the architecture and like there's just art like carved into the wall, and it's just breathtaking, and it gives you a different sense of what you're there talking about, and you think about like the other conversations that happened there before you got there, and it's really powerful.
So I'm curious from your perspective. I know we'll go out to a DC fly-in, we'll go meet with senators, representatives. Does that actually make a difference? Because I feel like you're in there and again, you're saying the same things over and over and over. Does it actually make a difference?
It definitely makes a difference. So we've had a number of times where, and specifically with Capitol Conference, when we have our big fly-in and bring all the NAHU members into DC, where we've had specific things that we are working on that happened because we had all of you there to go and meet with your members of Congress at the same time. So one of those a couple of years ago was getting that employer reporting bill introduced. And so that has helped us gain momentum to continue to be able to have that reintroduced. Another was the Cadillac tax repeal, which I know you guys are going to be like, we talked about that forever. Right. Yes, we talked about it forever, but we finally got it repealed at the end of 2017. And that was one where, and kind of using what Mike was saying earlier, like you have to figure out what your Antarctica is. And so at some points it was, okay, we just have to be happy with another delay of the Cadillac tax. Even though we keep asking for a repeal, we keep getting delays. Okay, we'll live with that. Eventually we'll get to a repeal, especially because historically whenever taxes are delayed, it's more likely that they get to a full repeal eventually. So those little baby steps that you all help us to get to really help, and those personal stories, because we have you all bring in examples of employers that were going to hit the Cadillac tax threshold, not because they were offering these huge benefit-rich plans, but because they maybe had a lot of older professionals. Maybe they were at some of the smaller colleges here where it tends to have an older or tenured professors that are there. My sister's a college professor, so I can say that. And she's older than I am. So she calls it that. And then, or, like maybe one of the examples we had was a custodial firm that had a lot of female employees. And so because of the makeup of their employees and not having a huge benefit-rich plan, they were hitting that Cadillac tax. So having you all bring those examples in are really beneficial, and it got us to the point of having that victory.
Absolutely.
So we can't do it alone.
No, absolutely. It's good to hear because it validates us going out there being involved, even if we are saying the same thing
Yes.
over and over. Did you have a question, Todd? Well, you know what? We'll come back to that because we got to wrap this up. We are standing between everybody and happy hour, so there's a couple of things we want to touch on. You know what? Before I do, though, I have to say, for being a policy quote-unquote wonk, I didn't expect this personality. So maybe I had a stereotype in my head, but that was, you're amazing to talk to.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I was not popular in law school. Let me just say that. I was also one of the only Southerners in Boston, so I got made fun of a lot, which is why my accent is almost gone. Although I say y'all, but they really beat it out of me in Boston.
Well, it's been great, and as we always do to kind of wrap things up, we're drinking, what is it, Marca Prosecco. So, maybe we'll take another drink, and then we'll kind of say what we think about it. So, let's cheers it up one more time. Yeah. It's bubbly.
It feels like a party.
That's a party.
Well, that's what, when I got here, I was going to say the party is here,
Yes.
so that's perfect.
Yeah,
That's good.
sweet and dry. Let me keep going.
I take it there's different versions of Prosecco.
Yes, there are.
I've never had
Very popular at brunch.
What do you all think about it? Is it okay?
We're good?
Wait.
Cheers. Absolutely. All right, well, Marcy, again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And to all of our guests here at the Omaha Marriott, our carrier partner sponsors, thank you so much for participating in this. And to all of our viewers online, thank you for joining us, and cheers.
Cheers.